So what's up people and welcome to another Battle Angel Alita Last Order discussion. Now this is a continuation video from the last video I made titled Why is Alita such a biatch? Or another way I titled it was Is Alita the annoying angel? And this is in reference to something that happens later on in the Last Order story. So this isn't in general. This is in a specific situation of that story. I won't go too much into it right now because of the fact that I am before my spoiler alert. And so what I wanted to do here was, since many of you gave such really good response to that particular question that I gave in that video, I thought that I would make this video to just kind of summarize a lot of the discussions that you provided. And so I do want to thank a lot of the commenters of that video, such as Alita Lore, Barry Benz, X-Men 577, Pablo Navarro, Is Leonel, Radio Chaos, Fabrizio Pedani, MacPB CEO Fishing, and Danomao. And if I mispronounced any of your names, I apologize. If I missed anyone, I apologize. But I really thank you for a lot of the discussions or comments that you provided. And if you notice, in my last video, I had a background or a click image of Alita kind of acting a little bit arrogant. But in this one, if you notice, I have Alita acting retrospective. And that's because of a lot of the comments that you provided, that a lot of the reasons for why she is acting the way she is at that certain time of the story comes back to a lot of the retrospect that she gives throughout the entire Last Order. And so I thought that a lot of that was very interesting, and because of that, that's why I wanted to make this video. And as always, before I keep on going, I do want to give my spoiler alert, since this is a Battle Angel Alita Last Order video, and as I mentioned, a lot of what happens, or what I talked about, happens in the latter part of Last Order. If you didn't read to the end of Last Order, then you may want to shut this video off again. And again, I've done so many of these videos. I think many of you know which side you kind of fall into. Do you want to turn it off or not? If you watched the previous video, then probably you could watch this video and you won't get too much more spoiled because you were already spoiled in the last video. If you didn't watch the last video, then most likely you shouldn't watch this video either, because we'll go actually into further depth than the last video. So anyway, that is my spoiler alert, and as always, please watch at your discretion. Okay, so with regards to that original video, just to quickly give a brief description of it. We talked about the point where Alita comes back, after she gets resurrected by Merlin. And at that time, she has that interesting body with the cat tail and wings. And at that point, I called her Feline Alita. But with that new body, she also had a little bit of an attitude. And that was most visible when she was fighting Touji. And that was quite the brutal fight where Alita was mercilessly hammering Touji. And Touji was seriously not only physically getting beaten, but psychologically getting beaten down as well. And so the question that came up is, considering that Alita is a warrior that respects the warrior spirit, what was she doing brutalizing Touji that way? And why was she acting in general in such an arrogant manner? And so many of you came back with some interesting comments, and I really appreciate a lot of these comments. They were very informative. and got me to thinking about a lot of things. And so I'll break it down into 3 particular points that many of you brought up. Okay, so for the first reason why Alita may be such a biatch at the end of Last Order, it came about from the statement that, to be honest, to some extent, Alita has always been a biatch all the way from the beginning of the story. And of course, now that we have read Last Order, at least this discussion goes into things in Last Order, when you see the adult version of Yoko, she is seriously a dark character. And of course, when I say biatch, I'm talking about a person who has attitude, a person who has kind of violent tendencies, a person who really doesn't care about the other person and can brutalize them. And all of that is a characteristic that you see very much in Yoko, which is very interesting because if you look at the Yoko as a child, she is very much the opposite. She has a very hard time showing any sort of aggression to anybody. And of course, you are contrasted between Yoko and Erika in the sense that Erika shows a much more frightening sort of personality. But by the time you see Yoko as an adult, oh yeah, that Yoko can give Erika a seriously good run for her money. Yeah, I mean, even that one incident where she encountered those soldiers in the space elevator when she was about to take the, what was it, the Project Guinevere to start the Operation Malwolf. And you remember she encountered those soldiers? Oh my gosh. That was one of the most brutal massacres in the entire series. I'm not sure if even Erika's fight against Ziz's team came out to that sort of brutality. And so, yeah, Yoko had a very dark, extremely dark, aggressive side. And that side is, of course, always inherent in Alita. And so even though she does lose her memory in the beginning or beginning parts of the original series, even the Alita that gets resurrected and then taken care of by a very kind gentleman named Ido, I'm sorry, I'm having a brain fart, has enough strength and the rebellious side to be able to counter Ido's statement that she shouldn't shed blood on her own hands, that she should not go towards becoming a hunter warrior. But of course, the biggest side that we saw of that attitude was when she was in the Kansas bar and took on those hunter warriors for the first time. And of course, we do know that that attitude gets her into trouble later on, and that causes a severe amount of anguish for everyone during the Japan arc. And of course, that's something that we see in the original comic, and that's something that I hope to see in the sequel movie, because it does provide a significant impact to the world building and the character building of Alita. And so yes, Alita does have this attitude, and it is one that's always inherent. And so what you may see in Last Order is just that attitude coming out, because as brutal as she was to Touji, she still wasn't as dark as someone you saw like Yoko. At least the images that you saw of Yoko throughout this entire comic was far, far darker than the Alita that was fighting Touji. So it might just be that characteristic. And of course, this characteristic gets or sets up a very good understanding of the second point that many of you brought up, which is, of course, that a lot of this is related back to Alita's childhood. And considering the fact that she had such a brutal childhood, as we find out as we continue to read the story, that it's there's just no way for her to avoid becoming sharp-edged and that dark persona that you see as Yoko. And of course, I already brought it up in the Many Faces of Alita. But what is interesting is if you go into the Last Order story, much of this begins around the time when she is in the Leviathan. And she meets up with that young child named Jiro. Jiro, I think is how you say the name. I apologize if I mispronounce it. But anyway, she befriends that little boy, rescues him from these hoodlums that were chasing him. And then because he is homeless or away from home, Alita takes her to the authorities so that they can bring him back to the proper guardians. And it's only later through Zazie that she finds out that it was actually Jiro's guardians that actually sent those thugs. And the reason Jiro left or ran away from home was because of the fact that the guardians were using the children as fodder, cannon fodder, for a battle game that was going on in the Leviathan. You could think of it as their version of Motorball, I guess, somewhat entertainment. But all these people would participate in that, and then they would fight to the death in a simulated war-like environment. And one of the groups, or the participants, was this one group, that always used children that they found, abandoned, and they would raise them as young soldiers, send them out to battle. And the nice thing for them, not the nice thing in general, but the thing that was convenient to them was that because there were so many abandoned children, so someone dies, they just get another, and they just raise them up and send them out. The way, you hear about these underground dogfighting, how they would raise pit bulls or something like that, and the children were raised that way. Jiro hated that and left. And of course, as the irony and the dark side of Battle Angel Alita shows, the next time Alita meets with Jiro is when Jiro has already been killed in the battlefield. And of course, that eventually results in that famous punch that Alita does to that one individual who turns out to be the field operative leader of that group that was raising those children as soldiers. Of course, later, this character comes back in her conscience or her imagination or her dreams, whichever way you want to say it. And this character, Colonel Payne, starts taunting Alita in the violence that she always conflicts within her. Does she want to bring out the violence? Does she not want to bring out the violence? Will she fall to the dark side? Will she remain on the light side? And is the light side really the light side? All of that is constantly being thought upon by Alita. And much of that becomes personified through this character, Colonel Payne. And of course, much of that then gets sent back to her childhood, and through it all, Alita starts getting her memory back of what her childhood was like. And, the thing that Colonel Payne says is, you could glorify being a hero or whatever, but in the very end, killing is just killing. And becoming the warrior is something that you might want to be proud and try to argue to be proud about. But in the end, what you're doing is something extremely violent. And she shows the violence and the consequences of a lot of what that violence brings on by showing a lot of her childhood and the violence she experienced at that time. But interesting enough, this is not a conscience per se. This is more side of inferiority for Alita. She's constantly questioning her actions, and regardless of which side she takes, Colonel Payne will actually criticize her for the action that she takes. So when she does hesitate to fight, such as when she was watching the other participants fight in the Zod Championship against the Stellar Nursery Society, Colonel Payne comes out again and says your refusal to fight and knowing that your comrades are out fighting is basically just a sign of cowardice. So welcome to being a coward. So either side she chooses, she realizes that it doesn't win because there is a negative side to whichever. So the light side is not particularly the light side according to Colonel Payne, which is of course her inferiority. And that's why she's constantly in conflict with herself with regards to, does she become the monster that she doesn't want to be, and yet is the monster actually the best solution for the situation at hand? Now, it is later on that she does come to a realization that, to be honest, there really is no way to understand which is the better choice, to be pacifist or to be aggressive. And she has seen the consequences of both, where both have shown to be done great things, and both have shown to done seriously horrific consequences. That pacifism isn't all the wonderful thing, and refusing to fight when you had the opportunity to do so to protect something can be equally devastating. And so Alita understands that eventually, no matter what she does, she may end up in the losing side of the situation, as Colonel Payne says, but that shouldn't stop her from making her decision. And so she decides that she will fight for whatever she believes in and what that she can actually move ahead. And this is something that she especially shows at a certain part of the comic that I will talk about when I talk about the third part that you commenters have mentioned in my previous video. And that is with regards to the fact that when Alita was fighting Touji, she was helping Touji move forward as a warrior, and it was because of that that she was giving such a very tough time to Touji. And I was thinking about it during my last video. I mentioned that although this sounds like a plausible thing, it seemed very interesting that she would take such an opposite route to what Joshigan did for Alita, where he kind of positively kept on pressing Alita to strive up, go better than she was, and use a positive attitude rather than a negative one to bring her feelings up to strengthen her as a warrior. So why would she use the opposite sort of strategy? However, that is specifically a fight between Joshigan and Alita, but there were other fights that Alita had a similar sort of experience from the side of Touji, where somebody was pushing her very strong in a negative direction that made her desperate enough to, rise above what she was able to do at that time and somehow become successful. And the most notable one that I remember of that is her fight against Kyrula Sanguis. And so in the battle between Alita and Kyrula Sanguis during the Zod Championship, Kyrula Sanguis was seriously brutal to Alita, not just in the attacks that she gave. You surprised Alita. considering she was pretty adept at her Panzerkunst by that time, how easily Kairula Sanguis was striking her, but also in a psychological manner, in the sense that she was basically saying how disappointed she was at Alita for pretending to be a Panzerkunst warrior and not even being able to fight at a level that she thought would be adequate for such a character. And so she seriously started taunting Alita, and she mercilessly pursued and attacked Alita, to the point where even when Alita decided to start fighting seriously and went into a little bit of a level of desperation, she kept on going, to the point where she basically almost killed Alita. She was not holding back at all. This was not let's see if you can grow out of this. This was basically, if you're not going to be able to survive my attacks, I might as well just kill you right here and now. And what was interesting is, I won't go into the details of why she didn't die at that time. You could go read the book if you haven't. But it basically taught Alita one thing, basically coming back again. If you are in a situation where everything is on the line and your life is on the line, you can't really hold back, and this, self-questioning actually can get you into a situation of trouble. She doesn't know what the outcome is. She doesn't know what the is good or what is evil to a certain situation. She only knows that to be able to move forward with the objective that she has at the moment, she'll have to fight in the utmost extreme to be able to even have a remote chance of winning against Kairula Sanguis. And when that happened, and when they finally fought, it finally gave Kairula Sanguis enough of an example of the warrior that was in front of her, that not only did she give the fight to Alita by basically letting Alita kill her, but also giving Alita the Fata Morgana at that time, because she thought that this character was worthy of that program. And so it was a very significant point in the story to Alita, and it made her understand that under the circumstances, sometimes you just have to go by what you believe is right, and once you do, you just go full out with that. There's no holding back, as the Alita in the movie said, to Hugo that one time, But throughout the entire story, she continues to go that direction. And although she is still being taunted by Colonel Payne, it becomes more and more apparent that she's starting to understand and believe that. And that is why I feel that this then can go back into her battle with Touji, in the sense that, sure, when Alita was fighting Touji, not only was she brutal in her taunting of Touji, but she was merciless in her pounding, at the point of basically being ready to kill him. But it's in the same way that Kairula Sanguis treated Alita, in the sense that Alita was saying, if you're not worthy of being able to fight at this level, it will be, to some extent, insult to you to not give my full force. And so, there may be a possibility that she was going full out with that, because she did have her killing instinct or killing intent at a maximum when she was fighting Touji. And of course, this resulted basically in a positive direction for Touji, because it was, as he said, although he would think of a lot of his philosophies from the understanding of cats, he understood that when you're cornered, even a rat would be willing to fight back at the utmost extreme at that point. And so Touji had to change from the cunning of a cat to a desperation of a rat, and through it all, he was able to overcome a lot of the obstacles that he had to get to the next level of his martial arts mastery. And so this turned out for Alita as well as for Touji to be a positive thing, regardless of how Alita acted to Touji. So did Alita know? Did Alita not know? It's a little bit hard to tell. But as she said in one of these points, sometimes you don't know the outcome, but you just go by what you believe, and that's what Alita did. And of course, what's interesting is at the end of Last Order, the spiritual essence of Danfa was able to identify this inferiority complex that Alita had personified as Colonel Payne. And that spirit was willing to take that Colonel Payne or that inferiority complex out. And basically say, as a warrior, do your best and survive, And so it was a very interesting retrospect. Throughout this entire Last Order story, there was this internal battle that she had between her dark side and her light. And in the end, she doesn't know any better which is stronger or which is right. What she knows is that to some extent, she has to go by what she believes, and that is what she moves forward with. And that may turn out to be very helpful when she gets to Mars Chronicle, because of the fact that somewhere along the way she will encounter her past as Yoko. And of course she is encountering her closest comrade, which is Erica, in an adversarial manner. And this persona may be necessary to be able to resolve that situation, to do whatever is necessary in the Mars Chronicle storyline. And so, I found this to be quite interesting that many of you commenters provided such comments and how each of these comments actually fit amongst each other to be able to create this situation where you somewhat understood why Alita came to that persona that she had in Last Order. And again, since this story is basically a single character's journey, and not a story about what should be good or evil, or you are the right one and you are the wrong one, sort of deal, this retrospect gives a very good understanding of the inner turmoils that a lot of people have to the actions that they do. And so, whether this is correct or not, I thought that this was very interesting because of the fact that this gave not only the adventure, the physical adventure that this character goes through, the spiritual adventure that she has with Merlin, Zeus, and Danfa, but also the psychological and character adventure that she has to overcome, when she confronts Colonel Payne. So that's about it for this episode, and I want to thank you once again for all your comments. I also want to apologize for any misinterpretation I had with regards to your comments. If I did not understand what you were saying, then I apologize. And, one last thing, it is true that she came back as a cat. And as such, the cat attitude actually does fit well with the persona that she was expressing at that time. So, everything kind of falls into place. But anyway, that's about it for this video. I'll continue on with more Battle Angel Alita and Alita Battle Angel videos in the future. I hope you join me at that time. I thank you all for always watching these videos. And until the next episode, happy comic book reading, happy movie watching, and as always, have a nice day, everyone.